Next up, I would love to welcome Michael Yichao to the stage. He is a narrative designer and a creative lead working on an R&D game at the studio Phoenix Labs. And let's say, given that he is a writer, can we please see some pencil emotes in chat? Thank you so much. Welcome Michael to the stage.
Hi folks, my name is Yichao, and I'm thrilled to be able to share this gdocExpo talk with you guys entitled Everything's a Dating Sim, How Relationships Drive Player Engagement and Meaning. A little bit about myself. I'm currently leading narrative on a brand new unannounced game at Phoenix Labs, and before that I was a narrative lead and creative lead on a variety of digital titles at Wizards of the Coast, and before that I worked as a narrative writer and senior narrative designer at places like Riot Games and ArenaNet. So as I was sitting down to make the slides for this talk, a friend actually tweeted something that was so perfect that I had to include it here. And so this is a little while ago now, but Riot Musia asked, "Is Mass Effect good? I just bought it because I want to date that hot alien, but figured I'd ask anyways." And this tweet is so perfect in so many different ways and touches on a lot of the things that I'll get into later on in the talk. But I have good news to report. Riot Musi has discovered that Mass Effect is indeed good, and also Garrus is indeed hot. So congratulations, thrilled for her. Now, with the talk titled something as silly as Everything's a Dating Sim, I think it would be a little irresponsible of me to not try to answer the question, what is a dating sim? For the purposes of our discussion today, I'm going to say a dating sim is a subgenre of game wherein the player must befriend and carefully build and maintain a relationship with one or more characters, oftentimes within a romantic context. A popular designed and intentional dating sim from the last few years is Dream Daddy, wherein players can play a character that romances and builds relationships with a series of dads, or daddies, if you will. With that definition clearly established, we move on to try to answer our question, what games are dating sims? And, well, the answer to this one is kind of spoiled in the title of the talk. Everything, every game is, or should be, or secretly is, a dating sim. Let's go through a few examples. First up, Hades. Released in 2018, this is an action-adventure roguelike game. Is this a dating sim? This one seems pretty obvious. Yes. Of course, the core gameplay loops of Hades is the roguelike procedurally generated dungeons, wherein you gain new abilities to battle your way out of hell. But in Hades, the game itself very obviously leans into visual novel-inspired aesthetics as you go along your journey and meet various members of the Grecian pantheon, who you form literal bonds with that then helps you become further empowered in your attempts to break out of hell and defeat your father, the titular Hades. In the game, the dating sim elements really help to deepen the story, giving further meaning, progression, and discoverability to the gameplay. And I mean, players really got into the relationship between Zagreus and all of the gods that he met. Like, really into it. Is League of Legends a dating sim? If you thought the answer is no, you're not paying attention because the answer is yes. League of Legends is a 5v5 MOBA, where players battle on a map over various objectives. But League of Legends is also a game with a roster of over 160 champions. Although there aren't any romantic overtones in the gameplay, and there aren't narrative systems in-game that delivers relationships or bonds, players oftentimes pick mains, or the champions that they focus on playing, and this is often chosen based not only on character skill set, but also based on character appeal. So these are the characters that players form an emotional connection with, whether it's because they find them attractive, or aspirational, or just really cool, or, really attractive. Whatever it is, League of Legends, at the end of the day, I would argue, is still a dating sim. At this point, I think you get it. Is Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild a dating sim? Absolutely. Yes, there's characters you want to form relationships with and that you care deeply about, and even characters that you care deeply about that you don't even get to see, such as the lonely arrow girl who says, "I hope he comes by and knocks an arrow for me. It's been way too long." Moving on from that one, Cult of the Lamb. Dating sim? You betcha. You can marry your followers and you create relationships with your followers that are generated not via scripted in-game plot, but via emergent activities that happens on a roguelike base builder character accumulator game, right? Then you look at Inscription. Is this a dating sim? Oh, heck yeah. You're super into the characters that are in your deck and the characters that you meet along the way. If you've played this game, boy howdy, is this an emotional hit. If you haven't, oops, sorry, mild spoilers. We're going to move on. Inscription is great. You should play it. So on and so forth. These games are all dating sims. And now that begs the question, why is this important? Or rather, why does this matter? Why do games go to such lengths to secretly be or overtly have dating sim mechanics in them? A cynical answer might be games want to monetize the power of horny. Thirsty people pay money, and so we put thirst traps into our games in order to make people buy them. And that's not wrong in some occasions, but I think more accurately, or perhaps more aspirationally, the true reason why we do this is because it's very powerful for games when we give players the chance to fall in love with our characters, to fall in love with our game via the characters and relationships we give them the opportunity to build. I know this is a bit redundant saying this to a room full of game designers, but games are immensely powerful because of the interactive element, where players aren't just passive observers or absorbers of story and content, they are actively participating in it. And more so in games than in any other medium, we have the power to give them the opportunity to feel like they have an impact in the world that they're playing in, and that they are forming real bonds with the characters that they interact with. In games, it's not just about the relationships between characters that we craft as storytellers and as game designers, it's also the relationship we give space to our players to form, to allow players to want to become the characters that they have fallen in love with, to want to care about and write fiction and to think about and to dream about the characters that they encounter in the games that they play. Because at the end of the day, relationships drive motivation. The relationships within a game's story creates the motivations for the characters to want to do things, and the friction and tension and conflict of those relationships creates the motivations for those characters to move the world and advance plot and create these story dynamics. But also, the relationship between player and character can give further context to the gameplay actions that the player is taking and give players play motivation to doing the gameplay loops and actions that the game design has crafted and put together as well. Relationships are an incredibly powerful tool in the arsenal of the game designer. So when we look at games like Inscription or Cult of the Lamb or Breath of the Wild, each of these games are incredibly strong entries into their genre, and they stand out for a multitude of reasons. But one that I think is oftentimes under-recognized is that each of these games have crafted space for the characters to have strong relationships and for players to form an emotional bond and fall in love with elements of the game insofar as the characters. So with Inscription, you have these cards that are characters that talk to you, breaking the expectation of units that are oftentimes disposable in other card games. In Cult of the Lamb, they've crafted this delightful opportunity for emergent story and relationships to happen between you and your cultists. And in Breath of the Wild, even though the characters are sparse in this very open and kind of lonely open world game, the characters you do encounter come with a lot of beautiful backstory and meaningful connections and relationships to Link, whose character design and personalities and wants are very crisp and clear and allow you to form that deep relation and emotional bond with the characters you encounter. All of these games are made more exceptional by giving the space to design opportunities for relationships to shine. So then the question becomes, how do we do that? How do we as designers create opportunities for players to fall in love with our characters as if they were playing a dating sim? And the answer to that is narrative design. Now, I can imagine what some of you are probably thinking. Yichao, I'm designing a 2D platformer and it's a dev team of one. I don't have time or budget for a narrative designer on my team. And when I say narrative design, I don't mean they have to be a specialized person who comes in and does plot or character descriptions for you. Far more so, it's about thinking holistically of your characters and making your characters an inherent part of your gameplay design process so that they are deep enough and offer enough for your players to have room to fall in love. And there are a lot of ways to do this, but for me, there's kind of three main areas that I think about when I'm trying to craft characters that offer opportunities for players to really attach to and find engaging. And those three things are character fantasy, make it personal, and creating space in the game to fall in love. Now, when I say character fantasy, I mean the various elements of your character that make up their appeal, from their gameplay or power fantasy to their narrative or plot purpose in fantasy. Oftentimes, early character fantasy explorations can also benefit from blocking in an archetype your character might fulfill, then further carving out the details that makes them unique to your game and your story. It's important when developing your character fantasy to do so with intention to avoid them falling into tropes or, at worst, flattening out into stereotypes. Even basic characters that serve a very simple narrative purpose or gameplay purpose should still strive to have something that defines them more than just as a broad stand-in. Your shopkeepers can have a little bit more personality than just a two-dimensional character standing there. This is all a kind of theory-dense description of this execution on character fantasy, so let's take a look at it in action with an example. Yone, a character that I got to work on while at League of Legends. Now, Yone is, when it came time to create this character of Yone, we were faced with a lot of different creative constraints in terms of his character and power fantasy. Now, the word constraints might be a bit of a misnomer because in reality, a lot of the limitations that we were kind of working within actually helped to serve us to more quickly define and refine our creative concept for who Yone would become. For example, we knew that we wanted a character when we were making Yone that would fulfill the archetype of a dual-wielding swordsman. His power fantasy and gameplay was one of a fast, agile, mobile fighter in the game, so we knew we wanted someone who could fulfill that fantasy. And we also knew that Yone had this unique constraint of having part of his story already defined. That is, he is the brother of an existing character in League of Legends. This guy on the left, Yasuo. And in Yasuo's story, a character who had come out years earlier, Yasuo had actually killed Yone in a duel due to a tragic misunderstanding. But now Yone was back from the dead somehow, and we had to figure out how, and figure out how Yone's story continues. Now, with all of these kind of constraints, and within the story as defined in Yasuo's backstory, Yone also had the additional archetype of being the older brother. He bore the burden of responsibility for his family, and he was always trying to make the honorable choice and rein in his wayward but very talented younger brother as they grew up as kids. And so there's a lot of kind of things that when we started working on this character that came, predefined, and it became about how to weave these together into a coherent character fantasy, right? We had a lot of different elements: the devoted older brother, a dual-wielding swordsman, a fast, agile, mobile fighter, all had to be within the bones and that built up this character. So from this place, I wanted to make sure that we really didn't fall into a stereotypical honorable fallen older brother story. It was also really important to me that Yone was a champion in his own right and wasn't just a character whose whole story was about another character, but rather he had his own wants and needs and fantasy of the kind of powers and struggles that he was dealing with. So we ended up crafting this story where Yone was stalked by this demon throughout his life, unbeknownst to him, and he ends up slaying the demon, but the demon becomes this mask affixed to his face, bringing him back to the realm of the living, where he must now slay other demons to understand what is this creature that has brought him back to life and seems to hold him in this liminal space in between. So here the work became layering together the narrative fantasy, the gameplay powers that were desired, and the archetype of the character that we're trying to create, all to help build a character that has a really clearly defined fantasy that is unique and fresh within the world of League of Legends. In the end result, we have the very, very dateable Yone. And dateable, of course, I mean a character with deep emotional underpinnings that players can invest in and fall in love with, both platonically and romantically, because look at those abs. Our artist really went ham. So the other element of creating characters that invite people to fall in love is making it personal. And what I mean by this, I think the Marvel example is one of the best examples of this. In Marvel, we have superheroes that are larger than life and usually engaged in mythic world-ending threats. But at the end of the day, what makes those superheroes deeply relatable and personable is the humans behind them. Spider-Man, is no one without Peter Parker, right? The human and relatability is part of what elevates the mythic parts of the story as well. And the vulnerability of those characters, their weaknesses, the things that they're most afraid of, are things that lend them strength and strengthen them as characters who feel worthy of our emotional attachment and investment, right? So I think the best example of a character that I got to do this work with was way back when I was writing for a Magic story on Magic the Gathering at Wizards of the Coast. And when I was writing a Magic story, one of the characters that I got to write stories for was Gideon, who, in the story of Magic, Gideon is one of several planeswalkers, or people who can travel through the multiverse, and he has helped to form this collection of mages called the Gatewatch, who have tasked themselves with watching for and protecting the multiverse against interplanar threats. And when I got to write some of his stories, one of the biggest challenges that I was grappling with was Magic was somewhat new to focusing on characters as centerpieces for their stories. Magic as a game had always focused on sets and settings, coming to brand new worlds where a whole new set of cards would come out describing a whole new fantastical setting, but was really venturing into telling narrative that is character driven for the first time. And so I was in a place where I was tasked to come in the middle of the story, as I joined a story team, and write stories for a character that is already mid-action in these really mythic kind of confrontations, but hadn't had a lot of space to tell his personal human story. And for me, that was really apparent in listening to the players, because the players were sharing a lot of feedback like, we just don't know why we care about these characters, who are these guys? And Gideon specifically suffered from, he really fulfilled a paladin-esque archetype in that he was very lawful good, he always did the right thing, he was motivated by what was just. And so for a lot of players, Gideon came across as the most boring member of the Gatewatch. And I'll be honest, that was kind of my impression when I first started writing stories for him. But in getting to know the character better and working with the other writers and digging deep into his backstory and lore and understanding this character better, I learned a lot about and really got to focus on elements of what made Gideon human, what made him vulnerable, and what made him, before he is this interplanar planeswalker of the Gatewatch, what made him tick and what did he care about, and why did this manifest as doing the quote-unquote good thing, right? So in Gideon's backstory, I learned that he is a character of deep faith. And this is especially noteworthy in a setting where gods are real and physical and you can talk to them directly. And there are different gods on the different planes that Gideon travels to. And in his story, he was really let down by the gods of his home plane. And so in the stories that I was writing, he had come into this new setting and met new gods that seemed to live up to the ideals that he so cherished. And so in writing these stories involving Gideon, I got to give and explore a lot more of his humanity, of the Peter Parker side of Gideon, so to speak, the things that kind of give him that complexity, him having moments where he has a crisis of faith, and digging deeper beneath him as just a generic good guy, right? And the result of that was having the opportunity to really give the personal human investments into his really mythic actions. And I hope that the stories I wrote helped to set him up for ultimately what happened a few years later, which is he kind of did the ultimate sacrifice in saving a fellow member of the Gatewatch and giving up his own life to do so. And for me, those big moments of sacrifice only matter if we first care about those characters as people. And I'm really proud of the work I did to try to contribute my small part in giving Gideon a more grounded and humanized side to him, in addition to the superlative magic and heroic character that he also served within the story. So number 3 of the ways to help make space for people to fall in love with their characters is give space for folks to fall in love. What I specifically mean is give space in your games for your players to fall in love, as in put this stuff in your game. I'm going to be a little cheeky and give League of Legends a bit of a hard time here. One of the things that League does really well and that I love is there are writers who create these beautiful prose stories about various things within the story of League of Legends and the world of Runeterra, and they're just really moving stories and tales, and they all live on this awesome website that's beautiful called Universe, but that exists outside of the game, and players don't get to experience these stories, and many players end up missing these stories even though they've played the game for years and years. And to me, that's a bit of a bummer, because these stories are lovely and wonderful, and players deserve the chance to engage with them. If you do all of this great work to build characters and to make room for players to fall in love with them, but you kind of hide them behind either putting them on a website outside of the game, or hide them behind a lot of menus that players have to really dig into, that they might not naturally come across, the work is kind of doesn't get to surface and give you the impact that you are seeking with that work, right? And it doesn't have to be big or monumentous. League actually, as much as I tease them about these stories that exist outside of the client, there's a lot of ways that League of Legends really does really cool ways of injecting story and character and flavor into the game. Not the least of which is all of the different voice lines that your character says as you're battling in the game itself. They all give you little hints about the character's personality, and sometimes they get to hint at bigger story beats that aren't going to come across in a 5v5 battle arena, but would invite players to learn more about these characters and find out deeper lore and story behind them. And again, if you're playing a character for the 100th time and you hear a rare voice line for the first time, it's always delightful to discover something new about your character or be invited to learn about their story further. League of Legends also, as much as I tease them about not putting story in the game, they've recently begun putting story in the game, starting with the event Spirit Blossom from a few years ago, or rather Spirit Bonds, where they created a literal dating sim-esque experience where players could build bonds with characters. This might sound familiar. And was able to experience stories with these characters in the client and in the game. It was super exciting and kind of served as a first testing ground for even more events where Riot is kind of putting that story front and center for players to experience, supported by in-game mechanics. And you don't have to insert a whole literal dating sim into your game in order to do this for your own designs. If you're not familiar with the Twitter account, Can You Pet Your Dog? It's one of my favorites. They ask the question for any game they play, can you pet the dog if there's a dog in the game? And the reason why I bring up this account is it can be as simple and as light touch as this example. So in Cult of the Lamb, there are several commands you can issue your followers. However, the dog acolyte has a unique interaction that allows players to pet them to gain loyalty. And so this wasn't something that just happened in the game, right? Like, this was designed with intention. The creators of Cult of the Lamb said, we will have dog followers in our cute animal game, and we're going to spend time, our artist is going to spend time creating this art and this unique animation. Our designers are going to implement it in the game, and it's this tiny little detail, but it just gives players an extra opportunity to fall in love with a little moment in your game, right? Things as light touch as this, or even lighter touch than this, little hidden snippets of text that reveal things about your character, that help to deepen and enrich the narrative and story and character experience of your game, invites players to have room to fall in love. So I might say all games are a dating sim or should be a dating sim, but if we pull back the tongue-in-cheek jokiness of it, what we're really saying is all games deserve to have moments for players to fall in love. And I invite you to craft with intention more invitations for people to fall in love. That's the end of my talk. Thank you guys so much for checking it out. And I just wanted to say here at the end, I've only been at Phoenix Labs for just under a year, but one of the things I'm really delighted for being at this company is, although I can't share anything about the game I'm working on right now, I'm really excited to say that I feel like I have the opportunity to get to tell stories and to build characters for players and to find unique and fresh ways to weave opportunities for those players to fall in love in ways that our genre that we're working in hasn't really done before. And before I blabber too much and make folks at Phoenix Labs nervous here, I'll end it at that. But please do reach out and chat if you'd like to learn more, or if you just want to talk and geek out about characters, or if you want to share the characters that I should fall in love with in your games. Find me on Twitter. I'm at Michael Yichao, and I look forward to playing your games and meeting you all. Thank you guys so much, and have a good one.
So what did y'all think of Michael's talk? Did you like it? Because if you did, make sure you share any quotes or thoughts on social media using our hashtag. And one more reminder that Game Devs of Color Expo is a place for creators of color to get a platform and share their work. So please, spread the love.